Inflation is going up. They've got problems in terms of supply lines within the country. They've got problems with productions of certain material. They are short on key components, for example, for airplanes. Belousov is being brought in because of those problems. He's being brought in not because they're economically successful during this war, but because economic weakness could undo the Russian war effort. All right, boyo, Mr. Belousov, now you got the job of trying to fix it all. I'm Scott Lucas. I'm professor of U.S. and international politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin, and the founder and editor of EA Worldview, which is a leading website for news and analysis on Ukraine, Russia, Europe, the U.S., and other parts of the world. So on Sunday evening, in an unexpected change, and I mean unexpected, we had no hint this was going to happen, Vladimir Putin reshuffled his senior ministers. And one of the headlines of this is that the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, who had been Putin's longest serving minister, not just defense minister, had been there since 2012. He's been moved out. He's been given a nominal promotion in the sense that he's been named Secretary of the National Security Council. That's a place where you put politicians when you're not sure what you're going to do with them, but you make them still seem important. He's lost, his executive authority. His predecessor, by the way, Nikolai Patrushev, who we were looking at as one of Putin's, key advisors, even though he was in this, largely sort of ceremonial post, he's gone. Now, Kremlin said, we'll tell you in a few days what's happened to him. We don't know what's happened to Patrushev. Shoigu has been sort of sidelined. And so you look to who the new defense minister is. That's a man named Alexei Belousov. Now, again, I suspect for many of your listeners and viewers, as well informed as they are in Russia, Belousov's not going to be a common name. Now, why is he there? Why is he the defense minister? Starting point is he's not there because of military experience. He has no military experience. He's not there because he has experience of being in charge of armed forces as a civilian. Got none of that. He's there because he's an economic official. He's been an economic official since 2000, roughly the time that Putin came to power. He's been the economy minister. He's been in charge of economic development. Since 2020, he's been deputy prime minister with economic responsibilities. So what does that mean? Putting an economic official in charge of the defense ministry, it means that the priority here is Russia's wartime economy and running that wartime economy indefinitely. And that sort of has two important messages, or it knocks back two important messages that the Kremlin and its, supporting activists, including in the UK, like to put out. So the Kremlin and its activists will say, "Oh well, we're winning. We're winning. We the latest is we're in Kharkiv in northeast Ukraine, and we've taken maybe about 35 square miles of territory since Friday. We're winning." And it's true. Russia has made those limited advances in the east, but that's not a complete victory. That's not anywhere close to where Vladimir Putin hoped to be in February 2022 when he thought he could overrun Kyiv in a few weeks. Rather than Russia thinking it's going to win in the short term, it's having to prepare for the long term, for the marathon, not a sprint. And that gives a lie to the second, or to the second talking point of the Kremlin and its supporting activists. Russia's ready to negotiate peace now. It wants peace now. Putin's a nice guy. All he wants is just a little piece of Ukraine here, a little piece of Ukraine there, and we can all have peace. Well, no. There would be a way out for Vladimir Putin probably to say, look, I've gained a little bit more territory in the east of Ukraine. Of course, I seized some territory in 2022 that I've held on to in the south. I'm going to negotiate to have those annexations recognized. Appointing Belousov as head of the economic ministry means Putin doesn't think he can, if Putin had any intention of negotiating, he doesn't think he can get that. So he's doubling down on his bet that he launched in February 2022 which is I can conquer Ukraine, I can make it capitulate, and I can take on the countries that support Ukraine. Whether you're talking about European countries, whether you're talking about NATO, whether you're talking about the US, whether you're talking about countries in other regions such as Asia or North America, I can take them on and I can win this thing. Um, Clearly, I don't think he can, but of course, Vladimir Putin is not one who's going to be listening to me these days. It's not as much as that Shoigu's relationship was soured with Putin, it's that Shoigu uh, was in a rivalry with other agencies, with other groups. Again, your listeners and viewers may remember that in 2023, the threat to Shoigu came from the Wagner Group mercenaries that were being used by the Kremlin almost as cannon fodder to try to, claim some limited gain in eastern Ukraine. When the Wagner Group leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who would later be killed, probably on Kremlin orders, but when Prigozhin decided to stage that rebellion in June 2023, he wanted Shoigu out. And he wanted the head, the commander in chief of Russia's armed forces, General Gerasimov, out. Putin stuck by Shoigu at that point. And he struck a deal with Wagner, which in effect ended the rebellion and bought him some time till he could decide what to do with Prigozhin. Shoigu's bigger rivalries, however, are in agencies like the intelligence agencies, including the military intelligence agency, including the state security agency, who have been thinking, well, we have our own way of running this war. We have our own little pots of influence, dare we say it, pots of money that we like to control. We don't really trust Shoigu with that. And a few weeks ago, uh, Shoigu's deputy, one of his deputy defense ministers, um, was indicted on corruption charges. Now, for someone to be indicted on corruption charges in Russia, amongst Russian officials, uh, that's not shocking because it's probably easier to be corrupt in that system if you have influence than it is not to be. The rare person is the one who's whiter than white. But in this case, the deputy defense minister had obviously been picked out, which is we're going to take this guy down. So he's now facing prison time. Another senior official has been indicted, arrested, I should say, alongside him. And that was a warning shot to Shoigu. Whoever ordered that indictment. But of course, the important thing is Putin didn't stand in the way of it. Putin didn't come in and say, "Oh no, this deputy defense minister, he's okay." Me, Vladimir Putin. Of course, I don't take any money. I don't have palaces and dachas and relatives on payroll. Of course, I'm not corrupt, but I'm not going to save this guy from the charges that he is. Yeah, and I think that sort of marked Shoigu's card in terms of where he was in the defense ministry. So he's pushed off to the side. You can tuck him away, along with, for example, the deputy head of the National Security Council is a guy named Dmitry Medvedev, who, for people who are kind of old like me, you might remember was the Russian president. And now they stick him in the National Security Council, and he just issues barking mad statements about how Russia's going to take over all of Europe and possibly the world. And, oh, we have nuclear weapons. To get back to a fundamental, though, and that is, even though Shoigu has been pushed off to the side, this doesn't end the rivalries. Uh, the military intelligence services, the state security services, Russian commanders all have their interest. And that brings up the obvious question. When you try to run the military on this economic first footing, will Defense Minister Belousov succeed? Now, there are reports which come out, from people who are supporters of him. He's honest. He's a straight shooter. He believes in straight state control of the economy. He's not like those other corrupt guys. But even if that's true that he's honest, can he actually survive the power struggles now that he's on the front line of them? And again, time will only tell with that. What I would add to this, because our headline today is, all right, Putin is preparing for the long-term war, the long-term assault on Ukraine and its supporters. Russia has got a very limited window to seize territory in Ukraine. For all the dramatic headlines about what has happened with the limited advances in the Donetsk region, and then what's happened since Friday with this offensive into the Kharkiv region across the Russian border, their window is really only until substantial US, European, and other international aid reaches Ukraine on the front lines. And especially if long-range missiles and warplanes start to reach Ukraine from the end of June, Russia's going to find it much tougher to make any kind of advance. So Putin is acting in this window. He's acting in this window where he has just been inaugurated for another 6-year term. He's displayed his authority. Now he makes these changes. But come the end of June, when the aid hits the front lines, where does he go next? That's going to be a key question. I seriously doubt that Shoigu will make the decision to rebel. First thing is that this is not a situation where he's been completely cast aside. He doesn't, that all his financial perks of the office go. He still gets a lovely salary from being Secretary of the National Security Council. He gets all the nice accommodation. He gets all the ceremonial awards just for sticking around. And there's a huge risk. I mean, one thing that I think a lot of analysts got wrong about Putin back in 2022. I think we got it right that he wasn't going to run over Ukraine, but I think people got it wrong that he was going to fall because of that. Putin is a political survivor inside Russia, and he does that by either going after his enemies and getting rid of them, like Prigozhin, or he co-opts them by putting them into places where they have the privileges of still being within the state system, even if they don't really have as much influence. As long as the Russian military decides that, for better or worse, they're going to stay alongside Putin, nobody is going to take a swing at him, I think. The defense minister beyond Vladimir Putin is the most important person in terms of that war effort. He's the person who is the liaison, as it were, for all of those commanders that are out there. He's a liaison for all the military production that's going on. He's the liaison with other ministers who are involved in the war effort. And in this case, you had someone who had that key position who had been there for such a long time. Now you get Belousov, who comes in, who takes on arguably the second most important role in Russia as this invasion enters its 27th month, 28th month, I should say. And, does he, with this different background, this almost 25 years in economic roles, does he get in and have that influence to be able to navigate and to liaise between those different agencies, to liaise with Putin, to liaise with the military commanders? We've seen a lot of Russian military commanders come and go. Now, that hasn't been true in the past year. It stabilized a bit under General Gerasimov. But there has been turmoil during this invasion where military commanders kept getting changed, where other ministers kept getting rotated out. And I think Belousov's got a very short period of time, because I think the stinger in the tail of this. I mentioned earlier there were 2 Kremlin lines that have been sort of knocked on their head by this appointment. Here's the third that's been knocked on its head. The Kremlin apologist in the West, and of course Khrushchev says, "Oh, our economy isn't affected by this invasion. We're doing great. Look, we've increased our GDP, we've increased production in certain sectors. Look, we're doing fantastic." The fact of the matter is, Russia is running an overheated economy. Any decent economist knows that. They are effectively spending with the hope that maybe they can pay it back later. Inflation is going up. They've got problems in terms of supply lines within the country. They've got problems with productions of certain material. They are short on key components, for example, for airplanes. Belousov is being brought in because of those problems. He's being brought in not because they're economically successful during this war, but because economic weakness could undo the Russian war effort. All right, boyo, Mr. Belousov, now you got the job of trying to fix it all.